The Pre-Raphaelites, Romanticism and the Medieval Revival. Written by High Event, narrated by Kara Miller. Chapter 1, Introduction to the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. The Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood was founded in 1848 by a group of young artists who sought to challenge the academic norms and traditions of British art. They rejected the influence of the Renaissance master Raphael, from whom their name was derived, and instead looked to earlier art, particularly from the Middle Ages and the early Renaissance, as their source of inspiration. The founding members, Dante Gabriel Rossetti, John Everett Millais, and William Holman Hunt, set out to create works that were both highly detailed and vibrant, with an emphasis on realism and an intense focus on nature and the human condition. The Brotherhood's ideals were grounded in a desire for authenticity and a departure from the stiff, formulaic art that was prevalent in the mid-19th century. This rejection of the academic conventions that dominated the Royal Academy of Arts was central to the group's manifesto. The Pre-Raphaelites sought to infuse their works with a deeper symbolic meaning, drawing from medieval literature, mythology, and religious themes, often invoking vivid imagery from poetry and prose to enrich their paintings. The group's style was characterized by sharp attention to detail, rich color, and complex symbolism. They aimed to capture truth in its purest form, rendering the subjects of their paintings with an almost photographic precision. Each piece often conveyed an emotional intensity that was far removed from the more restrained, idealized works of the time. Through this approach, the Brotherhood sought to bring art closer to life and to explore the intricacies of human experience. While the Brotherhood's initial goals were met with resistance and criticism, particularly from established critics and institutions, their work soon gained recognition. The movement became a significant influence in the world of Victorian art, inspiring not only other painters, but also writers, poets, and designers. Members of the Brotherhood, particularly Rossetti, Millais, and Hunt, often engaged in collaborations with poets and illustrators, blurring the boundaries between visual art and literature. Despite the relatively short existence of the Brotherhood, dissolving in the early 1850s, their influence continued to reverberate throughout the artistic world. Their ideals laid the groundwork for later movements, including the arts and crafts movement, and their work continues to be celebrated for its innovation, passion, and detailed, vibrant aesthetics. Origins of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. The Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood emerged in 1848 as a reaction to the academic art traditions that dominated British painting at the time. The founding of the Brotherhood was a collective effort by 7 young artists who sought to break away from the established norms and instead draw inspiration from an earlier period in art history, before the influence of the Renaissance master Raphael. This movement was founded by Dante Gabriel Rossetti, John Everett Millais, and William Holman Hunt, with the intention of creating art that was more sincere, detailed, and emotionally engaging. The founding members shared a dissatisfaction with the formalism of academic art, which was governed by the Royal Academy's rigid expectations. They believed that art had become increasingly formulaic and lacked a sense of true connection with nature and the human experience. The Pre-Raphaelites sought to revive the intensity and raw beauty of earlier periods, particularly the art of the medieval and early Renaissance periods, which they felt had been overshadowed by the more restrained and idealized styles that followed. They believed that the purity and clarity of early Italian painting, before Raphael's influence, represented a more truthful and expressive approach to art. The idea for the Brotherhood was conceived in a conversation between Rossetti, Millais, and Hunt in 1848. They were inspired by the notion of creating a collective of like-minded artists who could support each other in their mission to revolutionize British art. They felt that by working together, they could challenge the prevailing standards and create something entirely new. Their manifesto emphasized the importance of drawing from nature, an obsession with vivid detail, and a preference for painting from real life rather than relying on idealized forms or historical conventions. The Brotherhood's art would be filled with symbolic content, inspired by literature, poetry, and medieval and biblical themes, and would reject the artificiality of the academic traditions of the time. In the early years of the Brotherhood's existence, the group faced harsh criticism from both the public and the established art world. Their bright colors, intricate details, and unconventional subjects were seen as shocking, but this only fueled their determination to stay true to their vision. Despite their initial struggles, the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood had a profound impact on the art world, inspiring future movements and artists who sought to embrace the same ideals of artistic integrity and emotional truth. Founding members: Dante Gabriel Rossetti, John Everett Melasse, William Holman Hunt. The founding members of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, Dante Gabriel Rossetti, John Everett Melasse, and William Holman Hunt, were pivotal in shaping the course of 19th century British art. Their collective vision led to a dramatic shift in the artistic landscape, challenging the conventions of the time and establishing a movement that would have a lasting influence on subsequent generations of artists. Dante Gabriel Rossetti was the intellectual and poetic driving force behind the Brotherhood. Born in 1828 to an Italian émigré family, Rossetti was a gifted painter and poet. He had a profound interest in medievalism and symbolism, which was reflected in his art and poetry. His work often explored themes of love, beauty, and spiritual longing, frequently drawing from classical and biblical sources. Rossetti's use of rich colors, intricate detail, and vivid symbolism became hallmarks of the Pre-Raphaelite style. He was also a key figure in the movement's connection to literature, writing poetry that accompanied many of his works and that reinforced the symbolism in his paintings. Rossetti's intense emotionality and desire to merge poetry with painting set him apart as both a creative leader and a visionary. John Everett Melasse, born in 1829, was the youngest of the three founding members and perhaps the most technically skilled. Melasse had an early start in art, entering the Royal Academy at the age of 11, and quickly gaining recognition for his exceptional talent. He was known for his precise attention to detail and his ability to render natural scenes with photographic accuracy. Melasse's early Pre-Raphaelite works, such as Ophelia and Christ in the House of His Parents, broke from the idealized forms of academic painting in favor of a more vibrant and realistic approach. His works were often infused with moral and religious themes, yet his dedication to portraying nature with painstaking detail marked a radical departure from the softer, more stylized depictions favored by the establishment. William Holman Hunt, born in 1827, was known for his intense commitment to depicting the world in as much detail as possible, often with an emphasis on moral and allegorical subjects. Hunt's works were driven by a deep sense of symbolism, and he believed in the power of art to convey profound spiritual and social messages. His notable works, such as The Awakening Conscience and The Scapegoat, reflected his interest in themes of redemption, guilt, and societal critique. Hunt's meticulous approach to painting, particularly his use of light and color to create symbolism, was instrumental in shaping the Pre-Raphaelite aesthetic. Together, Rossetti, Melasse, and Hunt laid the foundation for the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, each contributing his unique artistic vision and approach to the movement, yet all united by their shared desire to create art that was both truthful and emotionally powerful. Their collective legacy has shaped art history, leaving an indelible mark on the evolution of modern art. The artistic and literary influences. The Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood was deeply influenced by a variety of artistic and literary traditions, which shaped their vision and approach to painting. The group's rejection of the academic standards of the time, along with their desire to return to the purity of earlier art, led them to seek inspiration from diverse sources, ranging from medieval and Renaissance art to the works of poets and writers. The most immediate artistic influence on the Pre-Raphaelites was the early Italian Renaissance, particularly the work of artists such as Giotto, Fra Angelico, and early Botticelli. These painters emphasized clarity, vivid color, and a direct relationship with nature, all qualities that the Brotherhood sought to revive in their own work. The Pre-Raphaelites admired the straightforwardness and the lack of idealization found in the art of this period, contrasting it with the more polished, highly stylized works of later Renaissance artists like Raphael and Michelangelo, whose influence had become the standard in academic painting. The Brotherhood sought to return to what they saw as a more sincere, truthful representation of both the natural world and human emotion. In addition to the influence of early Renaissance art, the Pre-Raphaelites were also drawn to medieval art and its symbolism. The Gothic revival, which was sweeping across England at the time, inspired the Brotherhood to embrace medieval themes and aesthetics. This influence is evident in their frequent use of religious and chivalric motifs, as well as in their choice of subjects drawn from medieval literature, such as Arthurian legend and Dante's Divine Comedy. These subjects allowed them to explore deeper moral, spiritual, and psychological themes, reflecting their desire to communicate complex ideas through their art. The literary world had a profound impact on the Pre-Raphaelites as well. Dante Gabriel Rossetti, in particular, was deeply influenced by poetry, both in his own writing and in the works of others. The group was inspired by the romanticism of poets such as John Keats, Alfred Lord Tennyson, and Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Their works often dealt with themes of love, death, and idealized beauty, subjects that were frequently explored in Pre-Raphaelite paintings. Additionally, the use of literary references in their artwork helped to create layers of meaning, inviting viewers to engage with both the visual and literary aspects of their creations. In combining these artistic and literary influences, the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood forged a distinctive path, creating works that were rich in symbolism, steeped in historical and literary reference, and charged with emotional depth. These influences not only shaped their artistic output, but also helped to establish the Brotherhood as a significant force in the evolution of Victorian art. A rejection of academic tradition. The Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood was fundamentally defined by its rejection of the academic art traditions that dominated the British art scene in the mid-19th century. The Brotherhood's founders, including Dante Gabriel Rossetti, John Everett Melasse, and William Holman Hunt, were disillusioned with the standards of the Royal Academy and the broader art establishment. They viewed the Academy's approach as formulaic and overly reliant on idealization, rather than a true reflection of life and nature. This dissatisfaction became the driving force behind their decision to break from tradition and forge a new path in the world of art. Central to the Brotherhood's rejection of academic tradition was their disdain for the techniques and ideals established by Raphael, whose influence had been a dominant force in European art for centuries. The members of the Brotherhood believed that Raphael's smooth, polished style had led to the stagnation of art. They sought to return to the vibrant, expressive qualities of early Renaissance and medieval art, which they felt had more authenticity and emotional resonance. For them, this meant a focus on intricate details, vivid color, and a deep connection to nature, rather than adhering to the more formalized methods taught in academic institutions. The Pre-Raphaelites were particularly critical of the academic emphasis on idealized figures and historical subjects. They believed that this approach created art that lacked depth and failed to capture the true essence of the human experience. Instead, the Brotherhood sought to depict real, living subjects with emotional intensity, using art as a means of exploring the complexities of the human condition. Their commitment to painting from life, whether in the form of detailed natural landscapes or accurate representations of the human figure, was a direct challenge to the tradition of drawing from classical models or historical themes. Furthermore, the Brotherhood rejected the notion that art should only reflect grand, historical narratives. Instead, they embraced the idea that art could also be a reflection of everyday life, incorporating social commentary, personal experiences, and emotional depth. They used symbolism and allegory to imbue their works with layers of meaning, inviting viewers to engage with their art on a deeper intellectual and emotional level. This approach was seen as radical and confrontational, and it led to the Brotherhood's initial criticism from the art establishment. However, their boldness in defying academic norms eventually left a lasting impact on the direction of Victorian art and influenced future movements such as the arts and crafts movement. Defining the Brotherhood's goals and philosophy. The Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood was founded with the clear intent to revolutionize the direction of British art, advocating for a return to sincerity, vivid detail, and a deeper emotional connection with the viewer. The group's founding members, Dante Gabriel Rossetti, John Everett Melasse, and William Holman Hunt, were united by a shared belief that art had become stagnant and overly influenced by the classical tradition, particularly the teachings of Raphael and the Royal Academy. They sought to reject the academic conventions of the time and to restore the purity of early Renaissance and medieval art, believing that earlier periods offered a more genuine, expressive approach to painting. At the heart of the Brotherhood's philosophy was the idea of painting directly from nature. The Pre-Raphaelites believed that true art could only be achieved by observing and faithfully representing the world around them. They sought to capture the details and nuances of natural light, texture, and color with extraordinary precision, setting them apart from the more idealized, generalized works of their academic peers. The Brotherhood also felt that art should be imbued with a moral or symbolic message, using vivid imagery to convey deeper truths about society, human nature, and spirituality. In contrast to the emphasis on grand historical themes or mythological subjects prevalent in the academic tradition, the Pre-Raphaelites aimed to elevate the everyday, finding beauty and significance in contemporary life. Their works often depicted ordinary people, scenes of nature, and allegorical figures drawn from literature, history, and religion, blending realism with symbolism to create works that were rich in meaning. They believed that art should not merely be a reflection of surface beauty, but should engage the viewer on a more profound level, eliciting emotional responses and intellectual contemplation. The Brotherhood also championed the idea of artistic collaboration. By working together, they believed they could produce works that were not only aesthetically cohesive, but also intellectually stimulating, blending their respective skills and visions. Their philosophy extended beyond the canvas, influencing literature, poetry, and the decorative arts, as members of the group often collaborated with writers and poets, such as Rossetti's own poetry, to create multidimensional works that transcended traditional boundaries of artistic form. Ultimately, the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood sought to revive the intensity and sincerity they saw in earlier periods, rejecting the formulaic academic traditions in favor of art that was both true to life and deeply symbolic. Their goals and philosophy set the stage for a transformation in British art, marking the beginning of a new era that would influence generations to come. Chapter 2: Romanticism and its influence on the Pre-Raphaelites. Romanticism, a cultural movement that emerged in the late 18th century, had a profound influence on the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. Romanticism emphasized individual expression, emotional depth, and a connection to nature, and these values resonated deeply with the Pre-Raphaelites, who sought to capture the intensity of human experience and the beauty of the natural world. In rejecting the rigid, idealized conventions of academic art, the Pre-Raphaelites looked to romantic ideals as a foundation for their own artistic vision. One of the key tenets of Romanticism that influenced the Pre-Raphaelites was the idea of the artist as an individual, unrestrained by societal expectations or academic standards. Romantic artists like William Blake, Francisco Goya, and J.M.W. Turner were known for their emotional intensity and their willingness to explore subjects ranging from the sublime and the tragic to the fantastical and the irrational. For the Pre-Raphaelites, this emphasis on the emotional power of art was an essential aspect of their own work. They sought to create paintings that were not just visually stunning, but also emotionally charged, exploring themes of love, loss, beauty, and suffering with an immediacy and rawness that was a departure from the controlled compositions of their academic peers. The Romantic movement also placed a strong emphasis on the sublime, the idea that nature could evoke feelings of awe and transcendence. This connection to nature was central to the pre-Raphaelite approach, as they sought to represent the natural world with an unprecedented level of detail and accuracy. Whether it was the lush, verdant landscapes or the meticulous rendering of flowers and fabrics, the Pre-Raphaelites' devotion to capturing nature reflected the Romantic reverence for the power and beauty of the natural world. Additionally, Romanticism was heavily influenced by literature, particularly the works of poets like John Keats, Lord Byron, and Alfred Lord Tennyson. The Pre-Raphaelites, particularly Rossetti, were drawn to the lyrical and often tragic themes of Romantic poetry, yet incorporating references to these literary works into their art. This blending of art and literature allowed the Pre-Raphaelites to explore complex emotional and philosophical ideas, while also making their work more accessible and resonant with the public. In sum, the Romantic movement played a crucial role in shaping the philosophy and aesthetic of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. Through their focus on emotion, nature, and literature, the Pre-Raphaelites embraced many of the ideals of Romanticism, infusing their work with a passion and intensity that set them apart from the academic art tradition they rejected. The beginnings of Romanticism in art. Romanticism in art began as a reaction against the rigid rules and conventions of the neoclassical tradition, which had dominated European art in the 18th century. While neoclassicism emphasized order, reason, and idealized representations based on classical antiquity, Romanticism sought to embrace emotion, individualism, and the sublime power of nature. This shift began in the late 18th century, gaining momentum throughout the 19th century, and brought about a dramatic change in the way artists approached their work. One of the earliest signs of Romanticism can be seen in the works of painters like Francisco Goya and J.M.W. Turner, who broke away from the controlled compositions and rational themes of neoclassicism in favor of more dramatic, expressive, and often personal subjects. Goya's dark and emotional Los Caprichos series, for example, critiqued societal norms with a raw and unflinching gaze, while Turner's later works, such as The Fighting Temeraire, conveyed powerful emotional responses to nature and the human condition. These artists rejected the notion that art should simply idealize beauty or historical subjects, instead opting to convey deeper, more subjective experiences that spoke to the emotions of the viewer. In literature, Romanticism had already taken root with the works of poets such as William Blake, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and William Wordsworth, who emphasized the power of the imagination, nature's beauty, and the expression of personal emotions. This literary movement had a profound influence on the visual arts, particularly in England, where artists began to draw inspiration from the themes of freedom, rebellion, and the exploration of the inner emotional world. Artists sought to capture the fleeting and often chaotic nature of human experience, whether in landscapes, historical scenes, or allegorical works. The beginnings of Romanticism in art also coincided with political upheaval in Europe, particularly the French Revolution and the rise of nationalism. These events inspired artists to focus on the individual and the collective struggles of society, further diverging from the emphasis on order and reason that had characterized earlier periods. Romantic artists sought to evoke a sense of awe and wonder, often through dramatic compositions that portrayed intense emotion, sublime landscapes, or tragic historical events. In sum, the beginnings of Romanticism in art marked a shift toward greater emotional depth, personal expression, and a renewed appreciation for nature. This movement sought to challenge the rationalism of neoclassicism, allowing for more individualistic, dynamic, and imaginative representations of the human experience. It was this spirit of Romanticism that would later influence the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, providing a foundation for their rejection of academic tradition and their embrace of emotional intensity and symbolic depth. Key Romantic artists and writers: William Blake, John Keats, and others. The Romantic movement in art and literature was shaped by a number of influential figures whose works emphasized emotional intensity, individualism, and a deep connection to nature. Among the most important of these figures were William Blake, John Keats, and other notable poets and artists who pushed the boundaries of creativity, challenging established norms and exploring profound themes of human existence. William Blake, both a poet and visual artist, is often regarded as one of the most unique figures in the Romantic movement. His work defied categorization, blending poetry with intricate illustrations and mystical visions. Blake's art, such as his illustrated poetry collections, Songs of Innocence and of Experience, and The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, combined intense personal symbolism with themes of spirituality, social criticism, and the human soul's journey. His visionary style, which often depicted fantastical and otherworldly scenes, was marked by a deeply emotional and symbolic approach to both art and poetry. Blake's rejection of the conventional academic system and his focus on individual vision made him a pioneering figure whose influence extended far beyond his lifetime. John Keats, one of the most beloved poets of the Romantic era, was known for his lyrical beauty and sensitivity to the fleeting nature of life. His poetry celebrated beauty, love, and death, while exploring the tension between idealism and the harsh realities of existence. Keats' famous works, such as Ode to a Nightingale and Ode on a Grecian Urn, evoke a sense of longing for transcendence and the pursuit of beauty in a world marked by impermanence. His work emphasized the power of imagination and the beauty of the natural world, qualities that resonated deeply with the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, particularly in their use of nature as a central theme in their art. Other key Romantic writers included Samuel Taylor Coleridge, whose Rime of the Ancient Mariner delved into supernatural themes and the tension between nature and human action, and Percy Bysshe Shelley, whose works like Ozymandias explored the impermanence of power and the importance of personal freedom. These writers, like Blake and Keats, sought to elevate the individual imagination and explore themes that resonated with the emotional and intellectual currents of the time. The works of these Romantic artists and writers deeply influenced the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, whose members were drawn to the emotional depth, the focus on nature, and the desire to express human experience in a raw and unfiltered manner. The Pre-Raphaelites embraced the idea that art could be a vehicle for profound emotional expression, spiritual reflection, and social commentary, echoing the ideals set forth by the Romantic poets and artists who came before them. Emotional intensity and subjectivity in Romantic art. Emotional intensity and subjectivity were central to the Romantic movement in art, reflecting a shift away from the rationalism and orderliness of neoclassicism toward a deeper exploration of the individual's inner life. Romantic artists sought to express personal emotions, moods, and experiences, often focusing on themes of love, despair, awe, and longing. This emphasis on intense emotion allowed for a more dynamic and personal relationship between the artist and the viewer, moving beyond the calm, restrained depictions of classical art to a style that was far more raw and expressive. Romantic art was marked by a desire to capture the inner workings of the human psyche, and artists often portrayed subjects in dramatic or heightened states of emotion. The use of vivid color, exaggerated forms, and energetic brushstrokes was intended to evoke powerful feelings, inviting the viewer to experience the emotional depth of the artwork. This departure from traditional, idealized representations of beauty and harmony reflected the Romantic belief that art should be an expression of the artist's individual perspective and emotions. The works of artists like Francisco Goya, J.M.W. Turner, and Eugène Delacroix exemplify this emotional intensity, often depicting scenes of turmoil, passion, or the sublime. In addition to emotional intensity, Romantic art was deeply subjective. Artists rejected the notion of objective representation in favor of capturing their personal, emotional response to the world around them. The portrayal of nature, for instance, was no longer just about accurate depiction. It was about the emotional experience of being in nature. For example, Turner's landscapes often emphasized the overwhelming power of nature, with storms, turbulent seas, and sweeping skies conveying a sense of awe and fear. Similarly, Goya's dark and surreal paintings, such as The 3rd of May, 1808, focused on the horrors of war and the emotional devastation it caused, allowing for a deeply subjective interpretation of the scene. This subjectivity extended beyond the physical world to explore the realms of the imagination and the supernatural. Romantic artists often turned to myth, fantasy, and historical events to explore the complexities of the human condition. Whether through the depiction of tragic love stories, heroic struggles, or the sublime forces of nature, Romantic art was intended to evoke personal, emotional responses, creating a sense of connection between the viewer and the artwork that was deeply rooted in individual perception. In the context of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, this emphasis on emotional intensity and subjectivity would shape their approach to painting. Like the Romantics, they sought to infuse their works with emotional depth, using vivid colors, detailed symbolism, and dramatic narratives to convey complex feelings and ideas. The Brotherhood's commitment to emotional truth and individual expression was very much in line with the Romantic ideals of their time. The connection between Romanticism and the Pre-Raphaelite movement. The connection between Romanticism and the Pre-Raphaelite movement is deeply rooted in their shared focus on emotion, individualism, and a rejection of the academic traditions that dominated the art world. Both movements emerged as responses to the rigid constraints of classical art and sought to break free from the formalized structures of academicism, championing personal expression and a more intimate connection between the artist and their subject matter. While Romanticism laid the groundwork for the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, the latter added its own unique twist by incorporating medieval and literary influences alongside the Romantic ideals of emotional intensity and subjectivity. Romanticism, which emerged in the late 18th century, placed great emphasis on the power of imagination, the exploration of human emotions, and the sublime aspects of nature. Romantic artists like William Blake, J.M.W. Turner, and Francisco Goya were known for their expressive use of color and dramatic scenes, conveying powerful emotions through their works. The Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, founded in 1848, adopted many of these Romantic ideals, but their approach was more focused on precision and detail. Like the Romantics, the Pre-Raphaelites sought to convey emotional depth in their paintings, but they combined this with an unwavering commitment to capturing the natural world with extraordinary accuracy. Their works were often infused with symbolism and vibrant color, evoking a sense of heightened emotion, much like the Romantic painters, but through meticulous detail and a deep reverence for nature. The Pre-Raphaelites were also influenced by the Romantic writers, particularly in their exploration of themes such as love, death, and spiritual longing. Dante Gabriel Rossetti, one of the founding members of the Brotherhood, was not only a painter but also a poet, and his works often incorporated the same intense emotionalism and vivid imagery that characterized Romantic literature. The Brotherhood's emphasis on the use of literature, especially works of poetry, as a source of inspiration reflects the Romantic belief in the power of words to convey profound emotional and philosophical truths. In this way, the Pre-Raphaelites embraced the Romantic tradition of blending visual art with literature, creating works that were multidimensional in their emotional and intellectual appeal. Moreover, the Pre-Raphaelites shared the Romantic obsession with the past, especially with medieval and mythological themes. This was a direct response to the more classical and rational approaches of their contemporaries. By returning to medieval and early Renaissance subjects, the Pre-Raphaelites sought to revive the emotional and spiritual depth they believed was lost in the academic traditions that followed the Renaissance. In essence, the Pre-Raphaelite movement can be seen as an extension of the Romantic ideals, combining a deep emotional engagement with the natural world, a celebration of individual vision, and a desire to create art that was both a reflection of personal expression and a social commentary. Chapter 3: Medieval Revival and its Impact. The medieval revival was one of the most significant influences on the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood and played a central role in shaping their artistic vision. During the 19th century, a growing fascination with the Middle Ages took hold in Europe, particularly in England, where artists, writers, and intellectuals began to look back to this period as a source of inspiration. This revival was a reaction to the industrialization and rationalism of the modern age, and it sought to return to a time that was perceived as more spiritually connected, emotionally rich, and artistically pure. For the Pre-Raphaelites, the medieval period offered an idealized view of life that was infused with mysticism, symbolism, and a deep connection to nature and the divine. The Pre-Raphaelites were drawn to medieval themes not only for their rich symbolism, but also for their vibrant aesthetic qualities. Medieval art, with its flat patterns, vivid colors, and intricate details, stood in stark contrast to the more subdued and polished style of the Renaissance and the academic art that followed. The Brotherhood sought to revive these medieval elements, embracing the decorative richness and symbolic depth of early Christian, Gothic, and Byzantine art. In their paintings, they often depicted medieval subjects, such as knights, chivalric ideals, and biblical stories, using the same level of detail and emotional intensity that characterized medieval illuminated manuscripts and religious icons. One of the key aspects of the medieval revival in Pre-Raphaelite art was the return to storytelling. Medieval art was often narrative in nature, and the Pre-Raphaelites embraced this tradition by creating works that conveyed complex stories, myths, and allegories. For example, paintings such as The Lady of Shalott by John William Waterhouse and The Awakening Conscience by William Holman Hunt drew on literary and medieval themes, using vivid imagery to depict the inner lives and moral dilemmas of their characters. These works were imbued with a sense of romanticism, morality, and idealism, which were core elements of medieval storytelling. Additionally, the medieval revival had a profound impact on the Brotherhood's view of religion. While many of their contemporaries viewed religion as a formalized institution, the Pre-Raphaelites sought to reconnect with the spiritual and emotional essence of the medieval period. They often depicted saints, biblical figures, and scenes from Christian mythology, but with a focus on the emotional and personal connection between the characters and the divine. This more intimate and spiritual approach to religious subjects resonated deeply with the public and contributed to the lasting popularity of the movement. In sum, the medieval revival provided the Pre-Raphaelites with a rich source of inspiration, offering a vision of art that was deeply symbolic, emotionally charged, and spiritually profound. By returning to the aesthetics and themes of the medieval period, the Brotherhood was able to create works that were at once timeless and innovative, bridging the gap between the past and the present while making a powerful statement about the role of art in society. The fascination with medieval themes. The fascination with medieval themes was a defining characteristic of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood and played a central role in shaping their artistic identity. In the 19th century, as industrialization and modernity began to transform society, there was a growing sense of nostalgia for the medieval period. The Middle Ages, often viewed as a time of spiritual purity, chivalric ideals, and a deep connection to nature, offered an alternative to the increasingly mechanized and rational world of the Victorian era. The Pre-Raphaelites, drawn to these aspects, sought to resurrect the emotional intensity, symbolism, and romanticism of the medieval past in their art. One of the key reasons the Pre-Raphaelites were drawn to medieval themes was their deep symbolic content. Medieval art was rich in religious and allegorical significance, often conveying complex narratives through symbolism and vivid imagery. The Brotherhood, particularly Dante Gabriel Rossetti, saw in these works a level of emotional depth and sincerity that was missing from the more academic and idealized paintings of the time. They were captivated by the medieval tradition of storytelling, where art was used to depict not just beauty, but profound moral and spiritual themes. This fascination with storytelling was reflected in their own works, which often depicted scenes from medieval literature, such as the Arthurian legends or biblical stories, with a focus on the emotional and personal struggles of the characters. The medieval period was also associated with a sense of spiritual authenticity, something that the Pre-Raphaelites felt was lacking in the modern, industrialized world. They admired the intense devotion and religious symbolism present in medieval art, which often portrayed saints, divine figures, and allegorical themes with a sense of otherworldliness and inner purity. In works like The Annunciation by Rossetti and The Awakening Conscience by William Holman Hunt, the Pre-Raphaelites sought to capture the emotional and spiritual essence of these medieval subjects, rather than simply adhering to traditional religious iconography. Their emphasis was on the personal connection between the divine and the human, a deeply introspective and emotionally resonant approach. In addition to religious themes, the Pre-Raphaelites were inspired by the chivalric and romantic ideals of the medieval period. The knights, ladies, and courtly love narratives found in medieval literature offered a rich source of imagery and moral exploration. The works of poets like Alfred Lord Tennyson, whose Idylls of the King explored the Arthurian legends, were highly influential to the Brotherhood, further deepening their fascination with medieval tales of love, honor, and tragedy. Overall, the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood's fascination with medieval themes was driven by a desire to reconnect with a time they viewed as more emotionally and spiritually authentic. By bringing these medieval themes into their art, they sought to create works that were not only visually stunning, but rich in symbolism and emotional depth, offering a profound critique of contemporary society and a return to a more idealized and meaningful past. Chivalric and religious imagery in Pre-Raphaelite art. Chivalric and religious imagery played a central role in the artistic vision of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, offering a rich source of symbolism and narrative for their works. Rooted in the medieval revival, the Brotherhood drew inspiration from the ideals of chivalry and the deeply spiritual themes that characterized much of medieval art. These elements allowed the Pre-Raphaelites to explore profound moral, emotional, and spiritual questions, creating works that were not only visually captivating but also rich in symbolic meaning. Chivalric themes, which emphasized ideals of honor, duty, and romantic love, were a natural fit for the Pre-Raphaelites, whose members were fascinated by the mythology and literature of the Middle Ages. They were particularly drawn to the Arthurian legends, which provided a wealth of material for exploration. Paintings such as The Lady of Shalott by John William Waterhouse and The Beguiling of Merlin by Edward Burne-Jones depict scenes from Arthurian legend, incorporating themes of love, fate, and tragic consequence. These works often feature noble knights and virtuous women, capturing the complex emotional and moral dynamics of medieval romance. The Brotherhood's depiction of chivalric imagery was not only a way to celebrate the virtues of honor and bravery, but also a vehicle for exploring human frailty and the consequences of moral decisions. Religious imagery also held significant importance within Pre-Raphaelite art. The Brotherhood sought to depict religious figures and biblical narratives in a way that was deeply emotional and personal, often focusing on the inner turmoil and spiritual struggles of the characters. In works like The Annunciation by Dante Gabriel Rossetti and The Awakening Conscience by William Holman Hunt, the Pre-Raphaelites reinterpreted religious themes with a new focus on the emotional and human aspects of the divine. Rather than adhering to traditional iconography, they used religious subjects to explore themes of redemption, sin, and divine intervention, imbuing these works with a sense of intimacy and personal connection to the viewer. The Pre-Raphaelites' approach to chivalric and religious imagery was deeply tied to their desire to convey emotional truth through their art. They believed that these themes allowed them to explore universal human experiences, such as love, sacrifice, and moral conflict, in a way that transcended time and culture. By combining the high ideals of medieval chivalry with the raw, emotional depth of religious devotion, the Brotherhood created works that were not only visually striking, but also rich in moral and spiritual resonance. In doing so, they redefined how art could address the complexities of the human soul and its relationship to the divine. The role of medieval literature and mythology. Medieval literature and mythology played a crucial role in shaping the themes and imagery of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood's art. The Brotherhood's members, deeply inspired by the romantic ideals of the Middle Ages, drew heavily from the legends, folklore, and narratives of medieval stories. This influence allowed them to create works that were rich in symbolism and explored timeless themes of love, honor, fate, and tragedy. These medieval sources gave the Pre-Raphaelites a framework through which they could both celebrate and critique the complexities of human nature, spirituality, and society. One of the most significant literary influences on the Pre-Raphaelites was the Arthurian legends, which were a cornerstone of medieval myth. The tales of King Arthur, the Knights of the Round Table, and the quests for the Holy Grail provided a wealth of material for the Brotherhood to explore. These stories, steeped in themes of chivalry, heroism, and moral conflict, offered powerful narrative structures for depicting both the nobility of human aspiration and the darker, more tragic aspects of human nature. Works like The Lady of Shalott by Alfred Lord Tennyson, which was frequently depicted by Pre-Raphaelite artists, explore the tragic isolation of women within these idealized, heroic narratives. Similarly, the paintings of Edward Burne-Jones, such as The Beguiling of Merlin, reflect the intrigue and mystery surrounding the knights and their fateful choices, emphasizing both the magical and the moral complexities of medieval myth. In addition to the Arthurian cycle, the Pre-Raphaelites also found inspiration in other medieval literary works, including the writings of Dante Alighieri. Dante's Divine Comedy, with its vivid descriptions of the afterlife and its allegorical exploration of sin and redemption, was an influential source for artists like Dante Gabriel Rossetti, who took both artistic and literary inspiration from the poem. The themes of divine judgment, spiritual longing, and moral conflict in Dante's work resonated with the Pre-Raphaelites' own focus on religious and philosophical ideas, providing a narrative framework for their explorations of sin, suffering, and salvation in art. Medieval mythology also offered the Brotherhood a means of exploring the supernatural, the fantastical, and the deeply symbolic. They frequently depicted mythological figures such as nymphs, fairies, and other creatures of folklore, using these characters as symbols of beauty, danger, and moral ambiguity. By incorporating these figures into their work, the Pre-Raphaelites were able to bridge the gap between the mystical and the real, creating a world where the boundaries between the human and the divine, the natural and the supernatural, were fluid and intertwined. Ultimately, medieval literature and mythology provided the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood with a rich tapestry of stories and symbols through which they could engage with universal human concerns. By blending these literary influences with their vivid, detailed artistic style, The Brotherhood created works that were both visually captivating and intellectually profound, offering new interpretations of ancient stories while exploring timeless themes. The symbolism of the medieval revival in art and society. The medieval revival, which was a significant influence on the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, carried deep symbolism both in its artistic expression and its cultural implications. The period marked a return to the themes, aesthetics, and ideals of the Middle Ages, which were seen by many in the 19th century as a time of greater spiritual authenticity, moral clarity, and emotional depth compared to the increasingly industrialized and materialistic Victorian society. For the Pre-Raphaelites, the revival of medieval themes provided not only a visual and narrative language, but also an opportunity to reflect on the changing values of their own time. Artistically, the medieval revival symbolized a rejection of the rigid and formulaic standards of the academic art world. The Pre-Raphaelites, in particular, used medieval imagery to assert their desire for a more personal, honest, and emotionally charged form of art. The detailed, vibrant, and symbolic use of medieval subjects allowed them to portray deeper truths about the human experience, often addressing moral dilemmas, spiritual struggles, and emotional conflicts. Themes such as chivalric ideals, courtly love, and religious devotion were not merely decorative or nostalgic. They were imbued with symbolic meaning that reflected the artists' critiques of contemporary society and their longing for a time when art was seen as more connected to human experience and higher spiritual truths. In works like The Lady of Shalott and The Awakening Conscience, the Pre-Raphaelites used medieval settings and stories as a means to comment on modern issues such as social roles, moral choices, and the limitations placed on individuals, particularly women. The medieval revival also had significant cultural and social implications. In the context of Victorian society, the Middle Ages were often seen as a time of purity and piety, in contrast to the perceived excesses and dehumanization of industrial progress. By reviving medieval imagery, the Pre-Raphaelites symbolized a desire to reconnect with a simpler, more spiritually rich past. This was especially resonant during a time when the rapid growth of cities, the rise of factory work, and the dominance of rationalism and materialism seemed to be eroding traditional values. The medieval period, with its emphasis on faith, community, and the natural world, offered an idealized vision of a world that was more in tune with the soul and the forces of nature. The Pre-Raphaelites' adoption of medieval themes was a way to criticize the moral decay they saw around them and to champion a return to values they believed were lost in the wake of industrialization. Furthermore, the symbolic use of medieval subjects allowed the Pre-Raphaelites to explore complex emotional and spiritual themes. The knights, saints, and legendary figures they depicted were often symbols of idealized virtues, such as honor, purity, and sacrifice. However, these ideals were frequently juxtaposed with the darker aspects of human nature: desire, betrayal, and sin, making the medieval revival a potent medium for exploring the complexities of morality and human emotion. In essence, the medieval revival in art symbolized a longing for spiritual depth, a critique of contemporary society, and a return to a time when art was seen as an embodiment of higher truths. Through their symbolic use of medieval themes, the Pre-Raphaelites sought to bridge the past and present, offering a vision of art that was both deeply personal and socially engaged. Chapter 4: Key Works of the Pre-Raphaelites. The Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood's artistic legacy is defined by a series of key works that embody their distinctive approach to art, characterized by intense emotional depth, vivid color, intricate detail, and symbolic meaning. These paintings not only illustrate the ideals and philosophies of the Brotherhood, but also reflect their commitment to capturing the human experience with both emotional truth and visual precision. Among the most famous and influential works are Ophelia by John Everett Millais, The Awakening Conscience by William Holman Hunt, and The Annunciation by Dante Gabriel Rossetti, each representing a unique aspect of the movement's aesthetic and thematic concerns. John Everett Malice's Ophelia, 1851 to 1852, is one of the most iconic paintings of the Pre-Raphaelite movement. The painting depicts the tragic scene from Shakespeare's Hamlet, in which Ophelia drowns while surrounded by a lush, highly detailed natural environment. Malice's meticulous attention to the natural world, from the intricate depiction of flowers to the shimmering water, is a hallmark of the Pre-Raphaelite style. The emotional intensity of the painting is conveyed through Ophelia's serene yet sorrowful expression, highlighting the tension between her tragic fate and the beauty of the world around her. This work exemplifies the Brotherhood's focus on combining narrative depth with a rich, vibrant aesthetic. Another key work, The Awakening Conscience, 1853, by William Holman Hunt, embodies the Pre-Raphaelite commitment to moral and social commentary. The painting features a woman rising from a man's lap, her face filled with realization and remorse. The scene is charged with symbolism, from the reflection in the mirror to the symbolic presence of the cat, representing the woman's lost innocence. Hunt's use of symbolism and his emphasis on moral consequences, particularly with regard to societal issues such as sin and redemption, set this painting apart as a significant work that engages with both personal and social themes. The meticulous detail in the figures and their surroundings emphasizes the Pre-Raphaelite approach to capturing the physical world with extraordinary precision. Dante Gabriel Rossetti's The Annunciation, 1849 to 1850, is a striking example of the Brotherhood's fusion of religious and emotional symbolism. The painting portrays the moment of the angel Gabriel's announcement to the Virgin Mary that she will bear the Son of God. Rossetti's rendering of Mary, with her contemplative and serene expression, contrasts with the powerful and ethereal presence of Gabriel. The work reflects Rossetti's fascination with the emotional and spiritual aspects of religious subjects, using vivid color and delicate detail to emphasize the sacredness of the scene. Like many of his works, The Annunciation combines religious iconography with an intimate, personal approach to the divine, creating a deeply emotional and visually stunning representation of the biblical narrative. These key works of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood exemplify the movement's commitment to realism, emotional depth, and symbolism. By focusing on themes of love, loss, redemption, and spirituality, the Pre-Raphaelites sought to create art that was both visually captivating and rich in meaning, challenging the artistic conventions of their time while forging a new path for future generations. Ophelia by John Everett Malice. John Everett Malice's Ophelia, 1851 to 1852, is one of the most iconic and emotionally powerful works in the Pre-Raphaelite canon. The painting, based on the tragic scene from Shakespeare's Hamlet, depicts the moment when Ophelia, having lost her sanity after the death of her father, drowns while surrounded by a lush, vibrant, natural setting. The work is notable not only for its striking emotional intensity, but also for Malice's meticulous attention to detail and his masterful use of color, light, and symbolism. In Ophelia, Malice uses the natural world as both a visual backdrop and an emotional counterpoint to the tragedy of the scene. The flowers that float around Ophelia and fill the surrounding water are highly symbolic, each chosen for its particular meaning. For example, the poppies represent death and sleep, the violets symbolize faithfulness, and the daisies are associated with innocence. Through this use of symbolic flora, Malice enhances the emotional gravity of the scene, connecting Ophelia's fate to the world around her and suggesting the interplay between life, death, and innocence. The precision with which Malice renders the natural environment, from the delicate flowers to the shimmering water, reflects the Pre-Raphaelite commitment to realism and the belief that every detail, no matter how small, carries meaning. The emotional intensity of the painting is conveyed through Ophelia's expression, which, despite her tragic fate, carries an air of calm resignation. Her eyes, fixed on something unseen, and her serene demeanor suggest a sense of surrender to her fate. This contrasts with the violence of the drowning, heightening the emotional complexity of the image. Ophelia's delicate, almost ethereal appearance, juxtaposed with the powerful force of nature surrounding her, emphasizes the tension between beauty and tragedy, a theme that was central to the Pre-Raphaelite movement. The technical execution of Ophelia is equally remarkable. Melas painted the scene on site in a real natural setting, enduring difficult conditions to capture the accurate details of the flowers, water, and the play of light. This commitment to portraying nature with intense precision was a hallmark of the Pre-Raphaelite style, and it adds to the painting's emotional impact by immersing the viewer in the authenticity of the scene. Ophelia stands as a profound meditation on beauty, tragedy, and the fragility of life. It exemplifies the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood's commitment to creating works that not only conveyed emotional depth, but also celebrated nature's intricate beauty, all while exploring complex themes of love, loss, and the human condition. The Awakening Conscience by William Holman Hunt. The Awakening Conscience, 1853, by William Holman Hunt, is a striking example of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood's use of symbolism to explore moral and emotional themes. The painting depicts a woman sitting on the lap of a man, seemingly in the midst of a romantic encounter, but with her gaze directed toward a mirror on the wall, which reflects her own moral awakening. Her expression is one of shock and realization, as if she is suddenly aware of the consequences of her actions, specifically her involvement in a sinful relationship. Hunt's use of vivid color, intricate detail, and symbolic imagery heightens the emotional impact of the work, transforming what might be a simple genre scene into a profound exploration of guilt, redemption, and personal transformation. The symbolic elements in The Awakening Conscience are key to understanding the painting's deeper meanings. The woman's gaze toward the mirror is crucial, as it serves as a metaphor for self-realization and moral reflection. The mirror acts as a window to her conscience, representing the moment she recognizes the gravity of her choices. The objects in the room further reinforce the theme of awakening. A cat playing with a discarded piece of lace suggests innocence lost, while the open window reveals a glimpse of the outside world, symbolizing the possibility of redemption and escape. The cluttered and oppressive interior, with its dark colors and heavy furnishings, contrasts with the bright, open space beyond the window, suggesting that the woman's moral and emotional imprisonment can only be broken by a shift in her perspective and actions. Hunt's attention to detail in the painting is characteristic of the Pre-Raphaelite style, with every object in the scene rendered with remarkable precision. From the textures of the fabrics to the reflection in the mirror, the painting captures the world in meticulous detail, creating a sense of immediacy and realism. This commitment to realism is balanced by the painting's symbolic richness, allowing the viewer to interpret the narrative on multiple levels. The Awakening Conscience is not merely a depiction of a moment of personal realization. It is a commentary on Victorian society's moral expectations, particularly regarding women's roles and sexuality. The woman's awakening can be seen as a moral and social reckoning, as Hunt challenges the viewer to consider the consequences of living a life detached from spiritual and ethical values. In sum, The Awakening Conscience exemplifies the Pre-Raphaelite commitment to blending narrative, symbolism, and emotional depth in their work. Through the use of rich, symbolic detail and a powerful moral narrative, Hunt invites the viewer to reflect on themes of guilt, redemption, and the possibility of moral awakening. The Annunciation by Dante Gabriel Rossetti. Dante Gabriel Rossetti's The Annunciation, 1849 to 1850, is one of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood's most significant religious works, combining spiritual reverence with deeply emotional and symbolic content. The painting depicts the biblical moment when the angel Gabriel announces to the Virgin Mary that she will conceive the Son of God. Unlike traditional depictions of this scene, which often emphasize divine grandeur or serene holiness, Rossetti's interpretation focuses on the intimate, human aspect of this sacred moment. The figures in the Annunciation are rendered with emotional depth, capturing not only the awe and reverence of the event, but also a sense of personal connection between the divine and the human. Rossetti's Virgin Mary is portrayed with an expression of quiet contemplation, her hands gently clasped in front of her as she processes the gravity of Gabriel's message. Her gaze is slightly lowered, lending her an air of humility and serenity, yet also revealing a profound inner contemplation. This portrayal contrasts with more conventional depictions of Mary, who is often shown with a serene or idealized expression. Rossetti's Mary is more grounded, more human in her response to the divine revelation, reflecting the Pre-Raphaelite emphasis on emotional truth and realism. The angel Gabriel, depicted as a young, ethereal figure, is surrounded by the soft glow of golden light, suggesting his divine nature. His form is delicate and graceful, in contrast to the solidity and earthiness of Mary. This contrast between the human and the divine, the earthly and the spiritual, is underscored by the detailed natural surroundings, which include a richly decorated interior with symbolic elements such as a small vase of lilies, representing purity and the sacredness of the moment. One of the distinctive features of the Annunciation is Rossetti's use of color and texture to heighten the emotional impact of the scene. The vivid red of Mary's robe, contrasted with the pale blue of her veil, evokes both the earthiness of her human experience and the transcendent nature of the divine encounter. The rich details in the drapery and the textures of the figure's clothing emphasize the Pre-Raphaelite commitment to realism, while also imbuing the scene with an aura of sacred beauty. Through the Annunciation, Rossetti offers a deeply personal and intimate vision of a pivotal biblical moment. The painting reflects the Pre-Raphaelite commitment to capturing both the emotional and spiritual dimensions of religious subjects, blending beauty, symbolism, and profound human expression. This work stands as a testament to Rossetti's belief that art could serve as a means to explore not just external beauty, but the deeper emotional and spiritual truths that define the human experience. The role of color, detail, and symbolism in Pre-Raphaelite paintings. The Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood was renowned for its meticulous attention to color, detail, and symbolism, elements that were central to their artistic philosophy and style. These artists sought to create works that were not only visually striking, but also deeply imbued with meaning, conveying emotional and intellectual depth through every aspect of the painting. By focusing on these key elements, the Pre-Raphaelites aimed to transcend the conventions of academic art and offer a more immediate and profound connection with the viewer. Color played a central role in Pre-Raphaelite paintings, often used to evoke emotional responses and to symbolize deeper themes. The vivid, intense colors in their works were meant to capture the viewer's attention and draw them into the narrative of the painting. The Brotherhood's use of bold, saturated hues, whether in the lush greens of nature, the rich reds of garments, or the striking blues of skies, created an almost otherworldly atmosphere, highlighting the importance of visual impact. In works like Ophelia by John Everett Millus, the vibrant colors of the flowers and water not only serve to beautify the scene, but also carry symbolic meaning, representing themes of life, death, and innocence. Through their masterful use of color, the Pre-Raphaelites brought a sense of immediacy and vitality to their art, enhancing the emotional resonance of each work. Detail was another hallmark of Pre-Raphaelite art, with every element of the painting being carefully observed and rendered with remarkable precision. The Brotherhood believed that the accuracy of detail, whether in the depiction of nature, fabric, or human figures, was essential to achieving a truthful representation of the world. This emphasis on detail was in direct contrast to the idealized and sometimes more generalized representations of the time. The careful rendering of textures, from the delicate folds of a garment to the intricate patterns of flowers, added to the sense of realism in their paintings, making the viewer feel as if they were encountering the scene in real life. This attention to detail also allowed for a deeper exploration of symbolism, as even the smallest elements could carry significant meaning. Symbolism was a critical aspect of Pre-Raphaelite art, allowing the Brotherhood to imbue their works with layers of meaning that extended beyond the visual. The use of specific objects, colors, or gestures often conveyed moral, spiritual, or emotional themes. In paintings like The Awakening Conscience by William Holman Hunt, objects such as the cat, the mirror, and the open window carry symbolic weight, offering insight into the inner lives of the characters and the moral dimensions of the narrative. The Brotherhood's use of symbolism allowed them to explore complex ideas, ranging from love and death to redemption and sin, without explicitly stating them, creating a richer and more engaging experience for the viewer. In sum, the role of color, detail, and symbolism in Pre-Raphaelite paintings was integral to their approach to art. These elements were not simply aesthetic choices, but were used to convey deeper emotional truths, creating works that resonated with the viewer on both a visual and intellectual level. Through their use of these techniques, the Pre-Raphaelites sought to bring art closer to life, capturing the complexity of human experience with unprecedented depth and beauty. Chapter 5: Gender and Symbolism in Pre-Raphaelite Art. Gender and symbolism are two central themes that shape the work of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, deeply influencing their portrayal of women and the narratives they chose to depict. The Brotherhood's exploration of gender roles and identities was often intertwined with a symbolic use of imagery, creating paintings that reflected both societal concerns and emotional complexities. Through their depictions of women, the Pre-Raphaelites challenged contemporary views on femininity, while also using symbolism to communicate broader ideas about love, morality, and societal expectations. In many of the Brotherhood's works, women are portrayed as both powerful and passive figures, often caught in states of emotional intensity or moral struggle. Female figures in Pre-Raphaelite paintings were frequently depicted in vulnerable or tragic situations, such as the ill-fated Ophelia in John Everett Millay's Ophelia, or the anguished femme fatales in Dante Gabriel Rossetti's works. These women often appear as symbolic representations of purity, innocence, and sacrifice, but their roles are complicated by the emotional or spiritual turmoil they endure. The idealized yet tragic portrayal of women in Pre-Raphaelite art reflects the complex relationship between gender and societal expectations. Women were often seen as symbols of beauty and virtue, but their emotional depth and moral struggles revealed the tensions between these idealized roles and the reality of women's lives. At the same time, the Pre-Raphaelites used gender as a vehicle for exploring deeper philosophical and symbolic ideas. Women were not only passive subjects of male gaze and desire, but also embodied symbolic representations of abstract concepts such as sin, redemption, or spiritual longing. For instance, in The Awakened Conscience by William Holman Hunt, the female figure symbolizes moral awakening, as her gaze toward the mirror and the reflection of her own conscience suggests a realization of the consequences of her actions. Similarly, the Virgin Mary in Rossetti's The Annunciation represents both maternal purity and the profound spiritual significance of the moment, embodying a sacred femininity that transcends mere beauty. The Pre-Raphaelites also explored themes of sexual desire and the consequences of defying moral or social conventions. Many of their female subjects exist in moral dilemmas, representing the tension between sexual liberation and societal condemnation. Rossetti's depiction of women, particularly in his famous Lady Lilith or the Proserpine, often presents them as seductresses or mythological figures who are both alluring and dangerous, challenging traditional Victorian ideas about women's roles and sexuality. Incorporating symbolism into these gendered representations allowed the Pre-Raphaelites to express complex ideas about human experience. By portraying women as both idealized figures and morally conflicted individuals, they highlighted the contradictions in how gender was understood in Victorian society. The symbolic use of color, gesture, and objects within these works added depth to the gendered portrayal, imbuing the figures with layered meanings that went beyond their immediate visual presence. Ultimately, the Pre-Raphaelite engagement with gender and symbolism reflects the movement's broader exploration of the tensions between societal expectations and individual expression. Their works provided a space for the complex exploration of women's roles, while the symbolism allowed them to address universal themes of love, morality, and personal identity. Depictions of women, victims, heroines, and sinners. The Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood's portrayal of women was central to their artistic vision, often reflecting the complex roles that women occupied in Victorian society. The depiction of women as victims, heroines, and sinners allowed the Pre-Raphaelites to explore both the emotional depth and societal constraints placed on women, while also utilizing these figures to express broader moral, spiritual, and symbolic themes. These portrayals were nuanced and multifaceted, offering a range of female characters who were not simply passive objects of desire, but active embodiments of various human conditions and virtues. Women as victims were a recurring theme in Pre-Raphaelite art, often used to convey the emotional and moral consequences of societal and personal struggles. For example, in John Everett Mallace's Ophelia, the young woman is depicted as a tragic victim of her circumstances, overwhelmed by grief, and ultimately drowning in a river. The scene's beauty is underscored by the heartbreaking symbolism of her death, which reflects the vulnerability of women in a world governed by rigid expectations of purity and submission. Ophelia's tragic fate highlights the emotional intensity of her inner turmoil, making her death not just a physical event, but a symbolic representation of the destructive power of love, loss, and madness. Such portrayals of female victimhood were also explored in the works of Dante Gabriel Rossetti, particularly in his depictions of women trapped in emotional or moral dilemmas, such as in The Soul's Tragedy. On the other hand, the Pre-Raphaelites also depicted women as heroines, figures of strength, virtue, and spiritual purity. In many of these works, women embody the ideals of love, sacrifice, and grace, playing pivotal roles in religious or mythological narratives. Rossetti's The Annunciation is a prime example, where the Virgin Mary is portrayed not as a passive, idealized figure, but as a strong, contemplative woman chosen for a divine purpose. The focus is not just on her purity, but on her active acceptance of her role in the sacred story, presenting her as a heroine of profound spiritual significance. Similarly, in works like The Lady of Shalott by John William Waterhouse, the female figure is both a symbol of tragic beauty and a heroine, representing the emotional complexity of women who are caught between societal roles and personal desire. Finally, women as sinners were also prominent in Pre-Raphaelite art, reflecting a deeper exploration of moral conflict and the consequences of defying societal expectations. Rossetti's Lady Lilith portrays a seductive and powerful woman, embodying both allure and danger. The figure of Lilith, often associated with temptation and rebellion, represents the complexity of female sexuality and the consequences of a woman's desire for autonomy in a repressive society. These depictions of women as sinners were not simply critiques of women's moral failings, but were deeply connected to the notion of women's agency and the struggle for personal expression in a world that sought to control them. Through their portrayal of women as victims, heroines, and sinners, the Pre-Raphaelites were able to engage with the societal and emotional complexities of womanhood in a way that reflected both the constraints and the potential for empowerment that women experienced in Victorian society. These depictions allowed the Brotherhood to use gender as a symbolic tool to explore larger themes of love, morality, and spiritual redemption, offering multifaceted portrayals of female figures that went beyond simplistic narratives. The role of the female model in the Brotherhood. The role of the female model in the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood was multifaceted and essential to their artistic process, both as an embodiment of their ideals and as a subject through which they explored complex themes of femininity, beauty, and morality. Unlike the traditional academic practice, where female models were often reduced to idealized figures or passive subjects for male artists, the Pre-Raphaelites sought to elevate their models, infusing them with greater emotional depth, symbolism, and individuality. These women were not just muses, but active participants in the creation of works that sought to explore the human condition, spirituality, and the broader social roles of women in Victorian society. One of the key ways the Pre-Raphaelites used female models was to challenge the conventional depictions of women in art. They often portrayed them as more than just idealized or romanticized figures. In works like Ophelia by John Everett Millais, the female model, Lizzie Siddal, is depicted not merely as a passive object of male desire, but as an emotionally complex figure representing the tragic themes of love, madness, and death. Siddal, a prominent muse for the Brotherhood, played an instrumental role in shaping the group's approach to portraying women, and her own personal struggles and artistic aspirations added a layer of authenticity and emotional intensity to the work she inspired. Her presence in the paintings often captured the vulnerability and depth of the female experience, allowing her to transcend traditional notions of the passive female model and become a powerful symbol in the art itself. The female model also served as a vessel for the Brotherhood's exploration of gender, beauty, and societal roles. While many of the women in Pre-Raphaelite paintings embody ideals of purity, innocence, or saintliness, these representations were often complicated by the emotional depth and moral complexity infused into their characters. The models were often depicted in moments of moral conflict, transformation, or emotional intensity, suggesting that the Brotherhood's exploration of femininity was far more intricate than the conventional portrayals of women in Victorian art. For example, in The Awakening Conscience by William Holman Hunt, the female model represents a moment of moral realization, symbolizing a woman's potential for redemption and self-awareness. Furthermore, the Pre-Raphaelites' use of female models often blurred the boundaries between art and life. Many of the women who posed for the Brotherhood were also artists or writers in their own right, and their collaborations with the male artists were not solely based on their physical beauty, but also on their intellectual engagement with the themes of the works. This mutual exchange between artist and model created a dynamic that was both personal and collaborative, making the model an integral part of the artistic vision. In this way, the female model was not just an object of visual representation, but an active participant in the creation of art that engaged deeply with themes of gender, identity, and social expectation. Through the role of the female model, the Pre-Raphaelites were able to explore and redefine the representation of women in art. These models became more than mere muses. They were symbols of emotional complexity, spiritual longing, and moral conflict, helping the Brotherhood convey the multifaceted nature of the human experience while challenging the societal norms of their time. Symbolism of female characters in Pre-Raphaelite art. The symbolism of female characters in Pre-Raphaelite art is a profound exploration of both the complexity of womanhood and the moral, spiritual, and emotional dimensions of Victorian society. The Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood often used female figures to embody not just the idealized notions of beauty and purity, but also more complex, layered meanings related to virtue, temptation, sin, and redemption. Through their detailed, symbolic portrayals of women, the Brotherhood invited viewers to engage with deep, often contradictory aspects of the female experience. One of the most common symbolic roles of women in Pre-Raphaelite art is that of the tragic heroine, where female characters are portrayed as victims of love, loss, or moral dilemmas. In works like Ophelia by John Everett Malus, the female figure represents innocence and vulnerability, with her tragic death symbolizing the devastating consequences of emotional turmoil and societal neglect. Ophelia's drowning in the painting serves as a powerful symbol of the destructive power of grief and madness, offering a commentary on the fragility of women who are subject to the emotional and social expectations placed upon them. Similarly, in Dante Gabriel Rossetti's The Lady of Shalott, the female character embodies the themes of isolation, longing, and the destructive nature of unattainable desires, symbolizing the personal cost of living within the constraints of societal ideals. Beyond victimhood, the Pre-Raphaelites also used female characters to explore themes of virtue and redemption. In many of their works, women represent ideals of purity, sanctity, and moral potential. For example, in Rossetti's The Annunciation, the Virgin Mary is depicted as the epitome of spiritual purity, yet the painting conveys a sense of human depth and contemplation, showing Mary not only as a divine vessel, but as an active, engaged participant in the sacred event. In works like The Awakening Conscience by William Holman Hunt, the female character undergoes a moral awakening, symbolizing the potential for redemption and personal growth. The woman's realization of her own moral failings represents a shift from passivity to active self-awareness, a theme that reflects the Pre-Raphaelite interest in personal transformation and spiritual clarity. Additionally, women in Pre-Raphaelite art often symbolize the tension between societal expectations and personal desires, particularly in their depictions of female sexuality. Figures like Rossetti's Lady Lilith embody the complexities of sexual freedom and temptation, challenging the conventional Victorian view of women as paragons of virtue. Lady Lilith, with her seductive allure and defiance of traditional gender roles, represents both the empowerment and the moral danger associated with female sexuality. Her symbolism is complex, depicting a woman who is both empowered by her desires and condemned for them, reflecting the moral ambiguities that the Pre-Raphaelites sought to explore in their art. In sum, the symbolism of female characters in Pre-Raphaelite art was a tool through which the Brotherhood examined deeper societal issues, moral questions, and emotional realities. Women in their paintings were not merely decorative. They were powerful symbols that conveyed a range of human experiences, from victimhood and virtue to sin and redemption. Through these complex portrayals, the Pre-Raphaelites challenged the simplistic views of women in their time and invited a more nuanced discussion of gender, morality, and identity. The cultural and social context of gender representation. The representation of gender in Pre-Raphaelite art was deeply shaped by the cultural and social context of Victorian England, a time when rigid gender roles were strictly enforced. The Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood's portrayal of women, in particular, was a response to both the idealization and the repression of female identity in Victorian society. Women were often placed on a pedestal as paragons of virtue, beauty, and domesticity, yet simultaneously constrained by societal expectations that confined them to the private sphere. In this climate, the Pre-Raphaelites sought to challenge these representations by offering complex and multifaceted portrayals of women, which explored themes of innocence, sexuality, virtue, sin, and spiritual transformation. In the Victorian era, women were expected to embody purity, passivity, and emotional restraint, and their roles were largely confined to the home, marriage, and motherhood. These societal norms often led to the idealization of women as passive, angelic figures, such as the angel in the house, a term popularized by Coventry Patmore's poem, which described the ideal Victorian woman as self-sacrificing and devoted to her family. The Pre-Raphaelites, however, did not conform to this idealized vision of womanhood. Instead, they depicted women as active, emotionally complex, and often in moral conflict. In works like Ophelia, by John Everett Malais, the female figure is not just a passive victim of circumstance, but a symbol of the emotional turbulence that women were often expected to endure silently. Similarly, Dante Gabriel Rossetti's Lady Lilith challenges Victorian notions of feminine purity by presenting a seductive, self-assured woman who defies conventional expectations of female behavior and desire. The Pre-Raphaelite treatment of women also reflected a critique of the moral and sexual double standards that governed Victorian society. While men were often allowed greater sexual freedom and agency, women were expected to maintain their chastity and virtue at all costs. Female characters in Pre-Raphaelite works frequently grapple with this dichotomy, embodying both the potential for sin and the possibility of redemption. In paintings like The Awakening Conscience by William Holman Hunt, the female figure's moral realization and awakening symbolize a possible path to redemption, suggesting that women, too, had the agency to confront and transcend societal moral judgments. Moreover, the Pre-Raphaelites often used their art to comment on the constraining roles that women were forced to inhabit. The women depicted in their works were not confined to passive, idealized roles, but were often shown as active participants in their emotional and spiritual journeys. Through these depictions, the Brotherhood explored the complexity of female identity, rejecting the simplistic, one-dimensional portrayals that were common in both art and literature at the time. In sum, the cultural and social context of gender representation in Pre-Raphaelite art was characterized by a tension between the idealization and repression of women in Victorian society. The Brotherhood's portrayals of women challenged these conventions by depicting them as emotionally rich, morally conflicted, and spiritually complex figures. Through their nuanced representation of gender, the Pre-Raphaelites critiqued the restrictive norms of their time and offered a more multifaceted vision of womanhood. Chapter 6. The Influence of Literature and Poetry. Literature and poetry had a profound influence on the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, shaping not only the themes and subjects of their artwork, but also the way in which they approached storytelling through visual media. The Brotherhood, particularly Dante Gabriel Rossetti, had a deep affinity for literature, often drawing inspiration from the works of poets such as John Keats, Alfred Lord Tennyson, and their own poetic compositions. For the Pre-Raphaelites, poetry and painting were inextricably linked, and many of their works were informed by the literary tradition, with paintings often serving as visual interpretations of literary themes, characters, and narratives. One of the most significant literary influences on the Pre-Raphaelites was the poetry of the Romantic period, particularly the works of John Keats. Keats's focus on beauty, emotion, and the fleeting nature of life resonated with the Brotherhood, who sought to express the emotional depth of human experience through their paintings. Rossetti's The Blessed Damozel, for example, was directly inspired by his own poem of the same name, where the image of a woman gazing down from heaven is rendered with the same wistful longing and spiritual yearning expressed in the poem's verses. The fusion of poetry and visual art allowed Rossetti to explore themes of love, death, and spiritual transcendence in a manner that combined the sensory immediacy of painting with the emotional and intellectual depth of poetry. Alfred Lord Tennyson's poetry was another key influence on the Pre-Raphaelites, particularly his retellings of Arthurian legend and medieval myth. Tennyson's Idylls of the King inspired numerous works by the Brotherhood, such as Rossetti's La Belle Dame sans Merci and John William Waterhouse's The Lady of Shalott. These works, deeply steeped in the themes of love, tragedy, and chivalric ideals, resonated with the Pre-Raphaelites' desire to revive the emotional and narrative power of medieval and mythological literature. Tennyson's lyrical poetry provided a framework for the Pre-Raphaelites to explore the same romantic, tragic, and moral themes in their paintings, bringing these literary worlds to life through vivid color, intricate detail, and symbolic imagery. The influence of Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy was also a significant element in the Brotherhood's work. Rossetti, in particular, was inspired by Dante's exploration of sin, redemption, and the human soul's journey. His paintings often incorporated themes of spiritual struggle and moral transformation, as seen in works like The Awakened Conscience by William Holman Hunt. The use of religious and allegorical motifs in the Brotherhood's art was in many ways an extension of the symbolic and narrative depth found in Dante's epic poem. Incorporating literary influences into their paintings allowed the Pre-Raphaelites to explore complex emotional and philosophical themes, transforming written words into visual narratives. These works not only engaged with the visual beauty of the literary world, but also offered a rich, multidimensional approach to storytelling, where the language of poetry and the language of painting could coexist and enhance each other. The Brotherhood's blending of literature and art created a profound legacy that connected visual art with the broader intellectual and cultural movements of the 19th century, inviting viewers to experience both the emotional and the intellectual dimensions of their work. Dante Gabriel Rossetti's poetry and its visual representation. Dante Gabriel Rossetti's poetry played a crucial role in shaping his visual art, with the two forms often intertwined in a symbiotic relationship that enriched both his literary and artistic pursuits. As a founding member of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, Rossetti was deeply influenced by the idea that poetry and painting could serve as complementary ways to explore themes of love, beauty, death, and spirituality. His poems provided the narrative and emotional underpinnings for many of his paintings, while his artwork gave his poetry a vivid visual form that helped to bring his literary visions to life. One of the most notable examples of the connection between Rossetti's poetry and visual art is his painting The Blessed Damozel, 1871, which was inspired by his own poem of the same name. The poem describes a woman who has died and ascended to heaven, gazing down at her lover who remains on earth, longing for the moment when they will be reunited. The emotional depth of the poem is mirrored in the painting's depiction of the damozel, a young woman bathed in light, with her gaze fixed on the world below. The vivid colors and intricate details in the painting, particularly in the rendering of the damozel's flowing hair and robe, serve to capture the ethereal beauty and spiritual yearning expressed in the poem's verses. The merging of poetic and visual forms allowed Rossetti to explore the tension between love and separation, the passage between life and death, and the idea of spiritual longing. Rossetti's focus on female subjects in both his poetry and art is another area where the connection between his written work and visual representation is evident. His poetry often explores the themes of love, temptation, and the complex emotional lives of women, themes that he also explored through his painted portraits of women. In his painting, Lady Lilith, for example, Rossetti portrays Lilith as a seductive and powerful figure, reflecting the mythological character's association with both temptation and female autonomy. The painting's composition, in which Lilith gazes directly at the viewer with an air of self-possession, echoes the themes of female empowerment and moral ambiguity present in his poem, Lady Lilith. The relationship between Rossetti's poetry and painting is also evident in his use of symbolism, which permeates both his written work and his visual art. Much like the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood's commitment to rich detail and symbolic meaning in their paintings, Rossetti infused his poems with layers of metaphor and allegory. His poems, often laden with sensual imagery and medieval themes, provided fertile ground for visual exploration, allowing his paintings to carry the weight of both aesthetic beauty and symbolic resonance. In conclusion, Dante Gabriel Rossetti's poetry and visual art were deeply intertwined, with each form complementing and enriching the other. His poetic exploration of love, longing, and spirituality found vivid expression in his paintings, while his artwork offered a visual dimension to the emotional and intellectual themes in his poetry. Through this fusion of words and images, Rossetti contributed to the Pre-Raphaelite ideal of creating a cohesive and immersive artistic experience, one that appealed to both the senses and the intellect. The role of medieval and classical literature in shaping the movement. Medieval and classical literature played a pivotal role in shaping the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, providing the movement with rich themes, moral complexity, and timeless narratives that would become foundational to their art. The Brotherhood was drawn to the evocative power of these literary traditions, which allowed them to explore deep emotional and spiritual themes, while also offering a critique of Victorian society. Through their fascination with medieval and classical texts, the Pre-Raphaelites sought to revive a lost sense of emotional truth, romantic idealism, and moral questioning that they felt was missing from the modern world. Medieval literature, particularly the Arthurian legends and chivalric romances, was a central influence on the Brotherhood's works. The themes of knightly honor, courtly love, and tragic fate found in works such as Le Morte d'Arthur by Sir Thomas Malory offered a framework for exploring both the idealized and the flawed aspects of human nature. The Pre-Raphaelites found resonance in the concept of unrequited or doomed love, and they used stories from these legends to depict women as both figures of purity and victims of societal constraints. For example, Rossetti's La Belle Dame Sans Merci and John William Waterhouse's The Lady of Shalott are direct visual interpretations of these medieval themes, each painting drawing from the same ideas of romantic longing and inevitable tragedy. By incorporating elements of medieval literature, the Brotherhood added depth and complexity to their portrayal of love, loss, and the tension between desire and duty. Classical literature, particularly Greek and Roman mythology, also had a profound impact on the Pre-Raphaelites. The mythological stories of gods, heroes, and tragic figures provided the artists with powerful allegories through which they could explore moral dilemmas, the complexities of fate, and the pursuit of beauty. The works of ancient authors like Homer, Ovid, and Virgil offered stories filled with passion, sacrifice, and the human struggle against forces beyond one's control. The themes of transformation, desire, and suffering found in classical mythology often appeared in the Pre-Raphaelite paintings, such as in Rossetti's The Awakened Conscience, where the woman's spiritual awakening can be seen as a metaphorical form of redemption, much like the transformation of characters in classical mythology. Through these influences, medieval and classical literature provided the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood with a wealth of themes that transcended time and place. The stories and characters from these traditions allowed the Brotherhood to question the moral and emotional values of their own society, while also celebrating the ideals of beauty, truth, and spirituality. The connection between literature and art in the Pre-Raphaelite movement formed a cohesive language where visual storytelling was deeply intertwined with the rich, complex narratives of both the medieval and classical worlds. The integration of text and image in Pre-Raphaelite works. The Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood was distinctive in its integration of text and image, using both mediums to enrich the meaning and depth of their artwork. The artists of the Brotherhood, especially Dante Gabriel Rossetti, believed in the powerful synergy between poetry and painting. They saw these forms of art as complementary, with text enhancing the emotional and intellectual depth of visual imagery, and vice versa. This fusion allowed them to explore complex themes and narratives that could not be fully conveyed through either medium alone, inviting the viewer to engage with their works on multiple levels. Rossetti, a poet as well as a painter, often fused his own poetry with his paintings, creating a dynamic dialogue between the two forms. His work, The Blessed Damozel, is a prime example of this integration. Rossetti wrote a poem to accompany the painting, and the imagery of the painting directly reflects the themes and emotions expressed in the verses. In the painting, the damsel gazes down from heaven, her longing and spiritual yearning echoing the sentiments of Rossetti's poem, where the woman waits for her lover in the afterlife. This seamless integration of text and image creates a multidimensional narrative that amplifies the emotional intensity of the scene, allowing the viewer to not only admire the beauty of the visual elements, but also to immerse themselves in the lyrical, poetic reflection of the scene's deeper emotional and spiritual meanings. Similarly, in La Belle Dame sans Merci, Rossetti again combined poetry and painting to explore themes of love, loss, and the mystical power of women. The painting and the accompanying poem both tell the story of a knight who falls under the spell of a beautiful but dangerous woman. The symbolic use of nature in the painting, from the barren, autumnal landscape to the ethereal, almost ghostly figure of the woman, enhances the sense of the knight's tragic fate, a fate foretold in the haunting verses of the poem. By using both text and image, Rossetti was able to expand on the narrative and emotional implications of the subject, giving the viewer a more immersive and layered experience. The integration of text and image in Pre-Raphaelite works was not limited to Rossetti. Other members of the Brotherhood, such as William Holman Hunt and John Everett Melasse, often drew upon literary sources, particularly from medieval and classical texts, to inform their visual compositions. Melasse's The Eve of St. Agnes, for example, drew on John Keats's poem, with the image of the two lovers and the evocative mystical atmosphere directly reflecting the romantic and dreamlike qualities of the poem. The Pre-Raphaelites understood that visual art and literature could work together to create a richer, more complex narrative, and their integration of these two forms became a hallmark of their artistic identity. Ultimately, the integration of text and image allowed the Pre-Raphaelites to deepen the emotional resonance of their work, inviting viewers to engage in a layered experience where poetry and painting complemented each other in conveying moral, spiritual, and emotional truths. By combining these forms, they created a unique way of storytelling that transcended the limitations of either medium, allowing for a more profound exploration of human experience. Key literary influences: Arthurian legends, Shakespeare, and more. The Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood drew deeply from a rich array of literary sources, with key influences including the Arthurian legends, Shakespeare's plays, and works by Victorian poets. These literary influences provided a framework through which the Brotherhood explored complex themes of love, fate, morality, and human emotion, imbuing their art with depth and intellectual resonance. The integration of these literary works allowed the Brotherhood to address timeless human experiences through both symbolic imagery and narrative depth. The Arthurian legends, particularly the works surrounding King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, were a significant source of inspiration for the Pre-Raphaelites. The themes of chivalry, honor, and tragic romance found in these medieval tales resonated with the Brotherhood's interest in exploring emotional and moral complexity. For example, Rossetti's La Belle Dame sans Merci and John William Waterhouse's The Lady of Shalott are direct visual interpretations of Arthurian myth. These works draw on the tragic, doomed love stories of the legends, such as the romance between Lancelot and Guinevere, or the unattainable ideal of the Lady of Shalott. The Pre-Raphaelites' use of these stories allowed them to depict women as both idealized figures and complex emotional subjects, exploring themes of desire, unattainability, and the consequences of passion. Shakespeare's works were another major influence, offering a vast range of complex human emotions and dramatic narratives that the Brotherhood could interpret visually. Shakespeare's plays provided rich, emotionally charged subjects that the Pre-Raphaelites were drawn to, particularly his tragic and romantic characters. In works like Ophelia by John Everett Melasse, the Pre-Raphaelites adapted Shakespearean characters to convey deep emotional suffering and moral ambiguity. Ophelia, in particular, was a frequent subject in Pre-Raphaelite art, as her tragic fate in Hamlet served as a powerful symbol of innocence lost, unrequited love, and the consequences of emotional distress. Through Shakespeare, the Brotherhood was able to explore the darker aspects of human nature, while also capturing the beauty of profound emotional and spiritual moments. In addition to medieval and Shakespearean influences, Victorian poets such as Alfred Lord Tennyson, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, and Christina Rossetti provided key inspiration for the Brotherhood. Tennyson's Idylls of the King helped to reinforce the Brotherhood's fascination with the Arthurian legends, while his other works, such as The Lady of Shalott, directly influenced the imagery in Pre-Raphaelite paintings. These poets' emphasis on emotional intensity, idealized beauty, and moral reflection found a perfect counterpart in the vivid, symbolic imagery that defined Pre-Raphaelite art. By integrating elements of these literary traditions, the Pre-Raphaelites were able to give their works a deeper narrative and emotional complexity, connecting their visual storytelling with the cultural and intellectual currents of their time. In conclusion, the literary influences of Arthurian legend, Shakespeare, and Victorian poetry were instrumental in shaping the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood's artistic vision. These works provided the Brotherhood with narratives that explored human emotions, morality, and tragedy, enriching their art with layers of meaning and allowing for a more profound connection between visual art and literature. Through these literary connections, the Pre-Raphaelites created a unique artistic language that transcended the boundaries of medium and form, offering viewers a deeply immersive experience of both sight and story. Chapter 7: The Legacy of the Pre-Raphaelites. The Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, though short-lived as a formal group, left an indelible mark on the course of art history, shaping subsequent movements and inspiring generations of artists, poets, and designers. Their legacy is not only seen in the vibrant, detailed artworks they produced, but also in their challenge to traditional artistic conventions and their exploration of symbolism, emotion, and narrative depth. The Brotherhood's commitment to realism, their idealized depictions of beauty, and their focus on intense, often moralistic themes would influence a wide array of artistic movements that followed, including the arts and crafts movement, symbolism, and even elements of Art Nouveau. One of the most lasting aspects of the Pre-Raphaelite legacy was their emphasis on nature, realism, and minute detail. In rejecting the academic tradition and its reliance on idealized forms, the Pre-Raphaelites pioneered a new form of realism in art. Their meticulous attention to detail, whether in the rendering of fabrics, flowers, or faces, set a new standard for painters. This emphasis on nature would influence later movements such as the arts and crafts movement, led by figures like William Morris, who was both a member of the Brotherhood's Circle and an important figure in advocating for decorative arts that return to handcraftsmanship and the beauty of nature. The arts and crafts movement's rejection of mass-produced objects and its embrace of detailed craftsmanship and the beauty of everyday life was directly inspired by the Pre-Raphaelites' approach to art and design. The Pre-Raphaelites' use of symbolism also left a significant legacy. Their symbolic representations of moral, spiritual, and emotional themes resonated deeply with later movements such as symbolism, which sought to convey ideas and emotions through symbolic imagery. Artists like Gustave Moreau, Odilon Redon, and James McNeill Whistler were influenced by the Pre-Raphaelite exploration of the symbolic potential of color, form, and subject matter. The Pre-Raphaelites' ability to intertwine visual art with deeper philosophical and emotional meanings paved the way for more introspective and symbolic approaches to painting, in which narrative and personal expression became central to the artistic endeavor. Moreover, the Pre-Raphaelite approach to female subjects, often complex, emotional, and multidimensional, contributed to a broader reevaluation of the portrayal of women in art. Their depictions of women as both innocent and tragic, saintly and sensual, allowed for a more nuanced understanding of gender and emotional complexity in art. This helped to shift the artistic discourse on female representation, influencing later artists who sought to portray women in a more authentic, less idealized light. In conclusion, the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood's legacy is far-reaching, shaping not only the direction of 19th century art, but also influencing movements and artists well into the 20th century. Their bold exploration of nature, symbolism, and emotional depth continues to inspire and challenge artists today, proving that their commitment to beauty, truth, and emotional expression was not a fleeting moment, but a lasting revolution in the art world. The evolution of Pre-Raphaelite art and its critics. The Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, founded in 1848, experienced a turbulent and evolving relationship with both the art world and its critics. Initially met with harsh criticism, their radical break from the academic traditions of the time led to a period of intense scrutiny. However, over the years, their work gained acceptance and influence, marking a significant transformation in Victorian art. The Brotherhood's commitment to realism, attention to detail, and symbolic depth challenged established conventions, and their innovative approach eventually left a lasting impact on the development of art movements in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. In the early stages of the movement, Pre-Raphaelite artists were widely criticized for their rejection of academic standards. Critics labeled their work as excessively detailed, overly colorful, and too sentimental. The emphasis on bright, almost unnatural colors, the intense focus on naturalistic detail, and the depiction of emotionally charged or morally complex subjects were seen as a break from the classical idealization of beauty. One of the harshest critiques came from the art critic John Ruskin, who, despite initially supporting the Pre-Raphaelites' aim to bring more sincerity and truth to art, later denounced some of their works as being overly indulgent in their emotional and moral interpretations. Ruskin, though supportive of the Brotherhood's challenge to the Royal Academy, also found fault with what he perceived as an overly literal and subjective approach to representation. Despite this early resistance, the Brotherhood's influence grew, especially as the emotional intensity and symbolic nature of their art began to resonate with a broader audience. Over time, their works were increasingly appreciated for their aesthetic beauty, emotional depth, and moral complexity. The detailed and vibrant representations of natural beauty, combined with strong narrative content, began to gain recognition for their innovative approach to storytelling through visual art. As their works gained acceptance, Pre-Raphaelite artists were able to expand beyond their initial focus on religious, mythological, and literary themes, delving into portraiture, landscape painting, and scenes of contemporary life. The shift in critical reception was also influenced by the rise of movements such as the arts and crafts movement and symbolism. These movements shared the Pre-Raphaelite emphasis on craft, beauty, and emotional expression. Artists like William Morris, who was closely associated with the Brotherhood, carried forward the ideals of the Pre-Raphaelites by emphasizing the importance of craftsmanship and aesthetic quality in both fine art and decorative design. By the end of the 19th century, the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood's impact on the art world was undeniable. Their initial detractors were replaced by later generations of artists and critics who recognized the innovative nature of their work and their contribution to the evolution of modern art. The Pre-Raphaelites' ability to fuse technical brilliance with emotional and symbolic depth opened the door for more personalized, expressive forms of artistic representation, influencing movements such as symbolism, Art Nouveau, and even the early stages of modernism. In the end, the Pre-Raphaelites not only transformed the landscape of British art, but also played a vital role in reshaping the way artists and audiences approached the creation and interpretation of visual narratives. The influence on later art movements, arts and crafts, symbolism. The Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood's impact extended far beyond their own era, influencing key art movements like the arts and crafts movement and symbolism. Their commitment to emotional depth, intricate craftsmanship, and symbolic imagery resonated deeply with these later movements, as both sought to redefine the role of art in society and explore new ways of expressing beauty, morality, and human experience. The arts and crafts movement, which emerged in the late 19th century, was one of the most direct successors of the Pre-Raphaelite ethos. Led by figures like William Morris, a close associate of the Brotherhood, the arts and crafts movement embraced many of the ideals championed by the Pre-Raphaelites, particularly the emphasis on craftsmanship, nature, and the rejection of industrialization. The Pre-Raphaelite focus on detailed, handcrafted art resonated with Morris's belief in the importance of beauty in everyday life and the value of handcrafted goods. Morris's designs for textiles, wallpaper, and furniture drew heavily from the natural motifs and rich, vibrant colors seen in Pre-Raphaelite painting. The arts and crafts movement also shared the Brotherhood's commitment to combining art with social values, advocating for the importance of decorative arts in improving the aesthetic quality of life for all members of society. This focus on aesthetic integrity and social purpose was deeply rooted in the Pre-Raphaelite spirit, as they too believed art should serve a moral and spiritual function. The Symbolist movement, which began to take shape in the late 19th century, was another area where the Pre-Raphaelite influence was keenly felt. Symbolism, which emerged as a reaction against the realism of the 19th century, sought to express the intangible, the mystical, and the emotional through vivid, often dreamlike imagery. The Pre-Raphaelites had similarly drawn from literature, mythology, and spiritual themes to convey complex emotional and moral narratives, and their symbolic use of color and detail resonated with symbolist artists. Just as the Pre-Raphaelites had imbued their paintings with symbolic references to love, death, and redemption, symbolist artists like Gustave Moreau and Odilon Redon used metaphorical imagery to explore the inner workings of the mind and the spiritual realm. Both movements were united in their rejection of the rigid academic approach to art, favoring instead personal expression, emotional resonance, and the exploration of hidden meanings beneath the surface of the visible world. In sum, the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood's influence on later art movements, such as the arts and crafts movement and symbolism, was profound and enduring. By emphasizing craftsmanship, emotional depth, and symbolic meaning, the Brotherhood helped lay the groundwork for the evolving landscape of late 19th and early 20th century art, encouraging a more personalized, expressive, and socially engaged approach to creativity. Their legacy continues to inspire and challenge artists today, as their vision of art as both an aesthetic and moral pursuit remains a powerful and relevant force in the world of visual culture. The enduring popularity of the Pre-Raphaelites. The enduring popularity of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood is a testament to the lasting impact they had on both the art world and popular culture. Despite the initial criticisms they faced, the Brotherhood's work has remained influential, captivating audiences for over a century. Their dedication to vivid color, detailed realism, emotional depth, and symbolic complexity continues to resonate with contemporary viewers, making their art both timeless and universally appreciated. One of the key reasons for the lasting appeal of the Pre-Raphaelites is their ability to blend idealized beauty with profound emotional and moral depth. The Brotherhood's work is rich with narratives that explore themes of love, loss, sin, redemption, and spirituality, offering a compelling exploration of the human condition. These themes are not only deeply universal, but also emotionally charged, making the paintings accessible to a wide audience. Whether it is the tragic beauty of Ophelia in John Everett Molass's Ophelia, or the emotional complexity of Dante Gabriel Rossetti's The Awakening Conscience, the Pre-Raphaelites' ability to capture the human experience in such vivid, detailed scenes continues to captivate people today. Another factor in the Pre-Raphaelites' enduring popularity is their technical mastery and attention to detail. Their paintings are often celebrated for their extraordinary craftsmanship, with intricate depictions of nature, fabric, and texture. The precise, almost photographic realism they achieved was revolutionary at the time and has continued to inspire admiration for its sheer beauty and skill. The lush colors, dramatic compositions, and symbolic use of nature are not only visually striking, but also convey complex emotional and spiritual ideas, inviting viewers to engage with the art on a deeper level. The Pre-Raphaelite revival in the 20th and 21st centuries also contributed to their ongoing popularity. Throughout the years, their work has experienced resurgences in public interest, often tied to broader cultural and artistic trends. Their art has been rediscovered and reinterpreted by successive generations, with numerous exhibitions, books, and even films exploring their legacy. Their influence on contemporary artists is undeniable, as the Pre-Raphaelites' commitment to beauty, emotional truth, and symbolic depth continues to shape the way art is created and appreciated. In popular culture, the Pre-Raphaelites remain a lasting source of inspiration, influencing everything from fashion to film. The ethereal beauty of their female subjects and their dramatic romantic themes have been adopted by numerous artists and creatives across various media. The Pre-Raphaelite aesthetic, characterized by flowing robes, natural settings, and intense emotional narratives, has been particularly influential in visual storytelling, helping to shape the way we view historical and fantastical tales today. In conclusion, the enduring popularity of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood lies in their timeless ability to evoke powerful emotions, their technical brilliance, and their profound engagement with universal themes. Through their art, the Pre-Raphaelites continue to captivate, inspire, and resonate with audiences worldwide, maintaining a lasting legacy that is as relevant today as it was in the 19th century. The Brotherhood's impact on contemporary art and culture. The Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood's impact on contemporary art and culture is undeniable, with their artistic principles and aesthetic continuing to shape and inspire a wide range of creative fields today. Their emphasis on vibrant color, intricate detail, emotional intensity, and the symbolic potential of art has resonated through successive generations of artists, filmmakers, fashion designers, and even musicians, ensuring that the legacy of the Pre-Raphaelites remains a potent force in modern visual and cultural expression. In contemporary art, the influence of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood is particularly evident in the work of artists who prioritize meticulous detail and vivid, symbolic imagery. The Brotherhood's commitment to rendering the natural world with painstaking accuracy has inspired many modern painters who similarly blend realism with deep emotional and symbolic content. For example, contemporary painters such as Kehinde Wiley and Audrey Flack, who use rich colors and intricate patterns to convey social and political narratives, reflect the Pre-Raphaelite commitment to combining high craft with meaningful storytelling. Additionally, the Pre-Raphaelite use of symbolism continues to influence contemporary art movements that explore emotional depth and complex human experiences. Artists working in both figurative and surrealist traditions draw on the Pre-Raphaelites' legacy, using detailed, often dreamlike imagery to explore the intersection of beauty, tragedy, and the human psyche. In the realm of fashion, the Pre-Raphaelites' influence can be seen in the use of flowing garments, intricate lace, and medieval-inspired designs, which continue to appear in contemporary collections. Fashion designers such as John Galliano, Alexander McQueen, and Vivienne Westwood have drawn inspiration from the lush, romantic imagery of the Brotherhood's paintings, incorporating their dramatic, symbolic aesthetics into modern clothing lines. The ethereal beauty and symbolic richness of Pre-Raphaelite women, often depicted in luxurious robes amidst nature, resonate strongly with today's fashion designers, who celebrate a fusion of historical references with modern style. The Pre-Raphaelite aesthetic also permeates the film industry, where directors like Peter Jackson and Guillermo del Toro have cited the Brotherhood's work as an influence on the visual style of their films. The fantastical, otherworldly beauty of Pre-Raphaelite art, with its detailed settings, ethereal figures, and mythological themes, is reflected in the visual storytelling of films that explore love, tragedy, and fantasy, such as the Lord of the Rings trilogy and Crimson Peak. These films echo the same blend of beauty and darkness that characterized much of the Pre-Raphaelite oeuvre, making their visual style an integral part of contemporary cinematic expression. In music, the symbolic depth and romantic themes of the Pre-Raphaelites continue to influence bands and artists who explore themes of love, loss, and the supernatural. The haunting, emotional quality of their works resonates in the music of artists like Florence the Machine and Nightwish, whose lyrics and album artwork often echo the tragic, lyrical nature of Pre-Raphaelite art. In conclusion, the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood's impact on contemporary art and culture is profound and ongoing. Their integration of vibrant color, intricate detail, emotional intensity, and symbolic meaning continues to inspire and shape creative expression across a wide range of disciplines. By challenging traditional artistic norms and exploring the depths of human experience, the Pre-Raphaelites have left a legacy that remains relevant and influential in today's world of art, fashion, film, and music. Chapter 8, Conclusion. The Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, though short-lived as a formal group, left an enduring legacy that continues to influence and inspire contemporary art and culture. Their commitment to realism, symbolic imagery, and emotional depth radically challenged the artistic conventions of their time, establishing a new direction for the future of British art. By rejecting the academic standards of the Royal Academy, the Pre-Raphaelites sought to bring art closer to life, depicting vivid, naturalistic scenes imbued with profound emotional and moral significance. Their innovative approach not only altered the course of painting in the 19th century, but also set the stage for the development of subsequent movements, such as symbolism, arts and crafts, and even elements of modernism. The Pre-Raphaelites' emphasis on intricate detail, vibrant color, and symbolic meaning set them apart from their contemporaries. Their works are more than mere visual representations. They are deeply intellectual and emotional explorations of the human experience. Through their paintings, the Brotherhood addressed universal themes such as love, death, sin, redemption, and the complexity of gender roles. These themes, conveyed with both lyrical beauty and stark realism, allowed the Pre-Raphaelites to reach a broad audience and create art that spoke to the emotional and spiritual lives of their viewers. Moreover, the Brotherhood's integration of literature and poetry into their artwork, particularly through the works of Dante Gabriel Rossetti, served to deepen the narrative and symbolic layers within their paintings. By drawing inspiration from medieval and classical texts, they brought these literary worlds to life, weaving intricate stories through visual representation. Their ability to merge poetry with painting allowed them to create works of art that were multidimensional, offering the viewer a richer experience and inviting deeper intellectual engagement. The Pre-Raphaelite legacy, far from being confined to the past, continues to resonate in contemporary culture. Their approach to art, with its focus on emotional intensity, symbolism, and attention to detail, has influenced countless artists, filmmakers, fashion designers, and musicians. The evocative beauty and complex symbolism of their work remain relevant today, as modern creatives continue to draw inspiration from their vision. In conclusion, the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood's artistic revolution was not just a fleeting moment in art history, but a lasting legacy that reshaped the way we approach both visual art and the broader cultural conversation. Through their dedication to beauty, truth, and emotional expression, the Pre-Raphaelites created a body of work that continues to captivate, challenge, and inspire audiences, ensuring their place in the pantheon of art history.